Ngayong araw ay i-discuss namin ang Module 15 which happened to be the last module for this semester. Accounting for Investment, Investment Property, and Others. Before we start our discussion, let us see first this motivation. Every moment you spend in prayer is an investment. It tells that every second that we dedicate for prayer is not something that will consume your life. Thus, it will return something far greater than the things you spent on other things. This, I think, is the best investment above anything else.
Lease, a contract by which one party conveys land, property, services, etc. to another for a specified time, usually in return for a periodic payment. Lease, ito yung may isang kontrata kung saan yung may-ari, tulad ng apartment, nagpapahintulot ng takdang panahon sa paggamit ng ibang tao kapalit ng kaukulang bayad. Lessor, lessor is the one which grants a lease. He is a person who's the proprietor of property or asset. Lessor, ito naman yung may-ari ng asset o yung pinapaupahan or tinatawag nating landlord or yung owner. Lessee, lessee is the one which takes the momentary possession of property in opposition to thought and quick one-time price or periodic funds. Lessee, magbibigay ng example. Example, nag-rent ka ng car for a dealership. For instance, ikaw yung lessee. Gets naman. Investment property is a property, either land or building, part of the building or both, held by an owner or lessee under a finance lease to earn rentals for capital appreciation or both. Investment property, dito naman meron kang assets, land or building na pwede mong paupahan para sa capital. Investment property versus owner-occupied. Investment property is held to earn rentals or for capital appreciation or both, meaning it is clear that investment property generates cash flow that are independent of the other asset of the entity. The use of property for production or any administrative purposes is owner-occupied and are considered as PPE. Dito, madidistinguish natin ng investment property sa owner-occupied kapag kaya mag-regenerate ng income independently sa other asset na ginagamit ng business for operation, considered siya as investment property. Pero kapag ang property ay ginagamit para sa operation or any other administrative purpose, ito ay owner-occupied at considered as property, plant, and equipment. Example, may land ka, tapos sinahaya mo lang yung land mo na nakatenga kasi pinapataas mo yung value.
Ngayon na may ideya na kayo kung ano ang investment property, mag-proceed na tayo sa mga examples na mako-consider if it is an investment property or not. 1. Land held for long-term capital appreciation. Dito is kung bumili ka ng property ngayon at inaasahan mong tataas ang market price nito in the future, ang magiging tawag doon ay long-term capital appreciation. Kaya yung property na binili mo ay example ng investment property. Second, land held for a currently undetermined use. Land for an undetermined future use is classified as an investment property kasi kahit na uncertain pa yung usage nito, yung magiging desisyon sa paggamit ng land as an inventory or sa pagdevelop ng previous property ng owner is something na mako-consider as investment decision. For the third and fourth example, building held for operating lease and building lease out under an operating lease. Ito lang yung for example, yung company ko is leasing out a building and I will only allow you to use my building, pero yung ownership ay akin pa rin. Yung land na yon is an example of investment property. For the last one, property that is being constructed or developed for future use as investment property. As indicated na po, the property is constructed or developed para sa future use. And say na yung property is polished na, then it is considered as an investment property. On the other side naman is yung mga property na cannot be considered as investment property. For the first one, property that is leased out to someone under a finance lease. Leasing out a property under a finance lease has greater risks since yung ownership ay may chance na malipat sa lessee kaya di siya makonsider as investment property. For the second one, property held for sale in the ordinary course of business. Obviously, kung ano man yung sale na meron ka ngayon mula sa normal operation ng business mo is something na hindi pwedeng makonsider as investment property kasi makaklasify siya as inventory. For the third one, property that is owner-occupied. Kung yung property is okupado ng owner nito, hindi yun classified as investment property kasi makukonsider na yun as property, plant, and equipment at magkaiba sila ng investment property. For the fourth one, property for use in the supply of goods and services or for administration use. Considering the usage of things and its purpose, makaklasify itong mga to also as PPE and not an investment property. And for the last one, property that is being constructed or developed for future use as owner-occupied. Ito rin ay classified as PPE kasi it's owner-occupied and it is not for the purpose of raising the property's market value. Therefore, it is something that can be considered as investment property. Take note that you will be able to identify a property if it is considered as investment property or not by knowing its purpose and usage. Next naman na i-discuss ko is about recognition of investment property. Investment property ay initially recognized at cost. Yung mga cost na yon, katulad ng transaction cost na expenses na nai-incur mo in buying and selling good or service. While yung mga cost naman such as startup cost, operating losses, abnormal amounts of wasted material, labor, and other resources are excluded or hindi sila nako-considered as cost. Take note lang po na importante na alam nyo kung ano yung i-include and exclude as cost para makuha yung initial measurement of investment. Another way of recognizing investment property is by subsequent measure. May dalawang models in subsequent measurement. Una is yung fair value model. It measures all investment properties at fair value. As an example is investment under operating lease, which may not be measured at cost for initial recognition because it must be measured at fair value. Second model is cost model. It measures naman po yung investment property at cost less accumulated depreciation and any accumulated impairment losses. Take note po na under IAS 40 or International Accounting Standard, malayang pumili ang entity sa dalawang model na to. Pero once na nakapili ka na either fair value model or cost model, kailangan mong i-apply yung model na yon in every property na pagmamay-ari ng entity. So kung fair value model yung na-pick mo, sa lahat ng property mo, ayun yung i-apply mo. Bawal yung fair value model yung ginamit mo dito, tas magiging cost model naman sa isa. Take a look at these two illustrations. Yung nasa kaliwa po ay example ng cost model na mayroong 9,000 annual depreciation, which tells us po na itong 9,000 na depreciation na to ay fixated ng iti-charge sa profit and loss at the end of each year. Meaning po na hindi na i-recognize ano pa mang changes sa fair value ng investment property throughout the year once you come up with this annual depreciation. Kasi po, dumedepende ang isang entity sa historic cost noong investment property nila. According po sa International Accounting Standards, mas preferably pong gamitin ang fair value model kaysa sa cost model dahil mas magbibigay ito ng clear picture kung ano ang magiging true value ng property. Kaya po sa next example, sa right side, makikita nyo rito na noong year 2017, merong increase na 20,000 sa fair value and naging 5,000 po noong 2018. Kasi sa fair value model, allowed kang i-recognize dito yung changes sa carrying value simula noong year 1 at sa mga susunod pa para po sa preparation ng profit and loss in the statement of comprehensive income.
So, ito naman, punta naman tayo sa property list to an affiliate. So, kapag sinabi natin affiliate, ano ibig sabihin? Yung company may connection sa ibang company. Like for example, parent and subsidiary company, sister company, katulad na lang ng Jollibee, ng Chowking, mga ganyan. So, ito yung pinaka-rule dito. So, kapag individual perspective, like for example, si company A, parent company siya. So, pinaupa niya kay company B na subsidiary company niya yung isang property o sabi natin land or building, pinaupa niya dun, ano yun, ititreat yun as investment property kapag individual perspective. Like for example, financial statement lang ng company A, ni company A yung gagawan mo ng statement of financial position. So, pero ito naman, kapag ang hinihingi naman is consolidated financial statements, ibig sabihin, yung buo, kaya si company A, may subsidiary company, na si company B, tapos meron pa siyang isa, company C. So, kapag ang na-record naman na gawin is consolidated financial position, i-viewed mo siya as a group as a whole. So, ang treatment sa, kunyari, si company A, pinaupa niya yung property niya sa subsidiary company niya. Ang treatment dun is property, plant, and equipment. Ibig sabihin, owner-occupied. Kasi may connection sila. So, yun. Yun lang. So, ito, example problem. Problem number 29-1. Ang source nito is Financial Accounting, Valix 2017. So, ito yung pinaka-requirements niya. Compute the total investment property that should be reported in the consolidated statement of financial position. Number 2, indicate the classification of the asset that are excluded from the investment property. So, iisa-isahin natin sila. So, na nga. Tapos, i-allocate natin sila kung sa investment property ba sila, property, plant, and equipment, or kung may iba pang account na mapapasama dito. Okay, let's start. Number 1, land held by the parent for undetermined use. So ang magiging treatment dito is investment property. At bakit investment property? Kasi nga, ang magiging presumption dito is capital appreciation. Kasi hindi mo naman alam kung saan mo ginagamit yung land na yan. So, habang patagal ng patagal, tumataas yung value niya. So, nag-a-appreciate yung value niya. So, yun yung magiging presumption dun. Kaya, siya investment property. Then, second, a vacant building owned by the parent and to be leased out under an operating lease. So, yun, pasok siya sa investment property kasi nga, building siya, then operating lease, ipapaupa siya. So, investment property siya. Third is property held by subsidiary, a real estate firm in the ordinary course of business. So, eto nga, real estate firm. So, bale, ano ba yung binebenta ng real estate firm? Di ba mga lupa, land, mga property, ganyan. So, gagamitin siya sa ordinary course of business. So, magiging inventory to. Kasi ang inventory ng real estate firm or yung mga product na binebenta nila is mga property. So, pasok siya sa inventory. Property held by the parent for use in production. So, ito, pasok siya sa property, plant, and equipment. Kasi nga, gagamitin siya sa production. Ibig sabihin, gagamitin siya sa operation ng business. Nakalagay naman sa kaninang sinabi ni Joyce.
Flashback.
Hindi mako-considered as investment if ang property is for use in the supply of goods and services or production.
End of flashback.
not considered siya na investment property kapag ginagamit siya sa operation ng business. So next is building owned by a subsidiary and for which the subsidiary provides security and maintenance service to the lessees. So ito, example to ng insignificant ancillary services. So, bale, ang treatment dito is investment property. Significant ancillary services kapag for example, ang business nyo is mga hotel. So, owner-occupied yun. Yun yung significant. So, ito naman next. Land lease by the parent to a subsidiary under an operating lease. So, tingnan natin yung requirement. Compute the total investment property that should be reported in the consolidated statement of financial position. So, kapag consolidated, anong dapat tingin natin sa ganito? Investment property or property, plant, and equipment? Di ba property, plant, and equipment? Kasi group perspective yung titignan natin dito. So, dun, pasok siya sa property, plant, and equipment. Next is property under construction for use as investment property. So, yun na nga, nakita naman natin kanina na considered siya as investment property kahit under construction, basta yung paggagamitan mo is investment property in the future. Pero dati hindi siya considered bago pa to baguhin. Property, plant, and equipment yung treatment dun kahit na yung paggagamitan mo siya sa investment property. Land held for future factory site. So, ito gagamitin siya sa future as operating. Gagamitin yung land na yun para sa operation ng business. So, ang treatment natin dyan is property, plant, and equipment. So, ang last is machinery. Leased out by the parent to an unrelated party under an operating lease. So, machinery, pinaupa. Pero wala na tayong pag-uusapan dito kasi kitang-kita naman una pa lang, machinery. Ang investment property, it's either land and building lang or part ng land, part ng building, or both. So, hindi siya kasama sa investment property. So, ang magiging treatment dito is property, plant, and equipment. Tapos, i-compute na natin yung total ng investment property kasi yun yung na-record sa number 1. 5 million plus 3 million plus 1.5 million plus 6 million is equals to 15,500,000. Sa requirement number 2, tingin ko naman na discuss ko naman about isa dito. Kaya yung sa mga excluded na discuss na rin. Kaya yun na, iwanan na lang natin. Bye!
A fund is a pool of money set aside for a specific purpose. Those pools can be often invested and professionally managed. Isang pondo kung saan ang pera ay nakalaan sa specific na layunin like investing or pondong magagamit tuwing may emergency or sakuna. Some common types of fund include pension funds. Ito ay contribution ng mga employees or employers nung sila pa ay nagtatrabaho. Dito magmumula ang matatanggap nila buwan-buwan kapag sila ay nagretiro na. Insurance funds. Ito ay isang arrangement kung saan magbabayad ka or ikaw ang babayaran kung may nangyaring masama or may na-damage na isang bagay. Foundation. Ito ay non-profit organization na naglalayong tumulong o bigyan ng pondo or grants ang mga institusyon o proyekto para sa edukasyon, relihiyon, kalikasan, charity, at iba pa. And lastly, endowment fund. Parang charitable pero nagiging investment ito. Ang endowment fund is often used by universities and hospitals. Funds for current purposes include A. Petty cash fund is a small amount of money na itinatabi upang ipambayad para sa di kalakiang expense such as office supplies or reimbursements. B. Payroll fund, pangbayad o pangsweldo sa mga employees. C. Interest fund, means a fund, escrow or reserve established for the purpose of providing a source of fund to pay interest in respect of indebtedness of the parents. Pag sinabing escrow, restricted siya. Di pwedeng galawin para sa ibang purpose. Ito ay nakalaan para lang sa pambayad interes sa utang ng isang entity. Dividend fund. Naglalayong mag-provide ng income, share in profits para sa mga common and preferred stockholder. Cash dividends and stock dividends. E. Tax fund. Designed to reduce the tax liability that its shareholders face. Funds for non-current purposes include A. Sinking fund. Isang account na ginagamit upang mag-deposit and to save money upang bayaran ang utang sa hinaharap. Sa madaling salita, ito ay tulad ng isang saving account that you deposit money regularly and magagamit lamang ito para sa itinakdang layunin. B. Preference Share Redemption Fund means returning the preference share capital to the preference shareholder sa isang takdang petsa o pagkatapos ng certain time period during the lifetime of the company. C. Planned Expansion Fund used for the construction, renovation, or facility. D. Contingency fund used for unforeseen future expense. E. Insurance fund. Isang arrangement kung saan magbabayad ka o ikaw ang babayaran kung may nangyaring masama or may damage ang isang bagay.
Sinking fund or redemption fund. A sinking fund is a fund containing money set aside or saved to pay off a debt or bond. A company that issues debt will need to pay that debt off in the future. And the sinking fund helps to soften the hardship of a large outlay of revenue. So, for example, may company ka. Then, nakipag-bond ka sa isa pang company. Then, for everyday transactions, di may iwasan na magkaroon ka ng expenses. And sometimes, kailangan mo mangutang sa kaband or kapartner mong company. So, yung kaband mong company is hindi magdadalawang isip na pautangin ka kasi meron kang sinking fund na maaari mong gamitin pambayad sa mga inutang mo. Generally, a bond is non-current assets. However, if the bond payable for which the sinking fund was set aside becomes due within 12 months after the end of reporting period, the sinking fund is i-reclassified na as current asset and it is included in cash and cash equivalent account. So next, preference share redemption. Cash set aside to pay the preferential shareholder, either a fixed date or within an amount of time, during most of the life of the given company. So dito, sa preference share redemption, meron kang cash na sineset aside to pay all the preferential shareholder. So, ang preferential shareholder, sila yung mga shareholders na tumutulong para tumaas ang equity ng isang company. Wala silang karapatang bumoto, pero sila yung unang babayaran ng company before the ordinary shares or also known common stock. So, example, entity set aside 1 million for redemption of preference share. So, the journal entry, debit, preference share redemption fund, 1 million. Then credit, cash, 1 million. Originally, 10,000 preference share are issued at 50 per value. and the entity decided that the value of redemption is 53 per share. So the journal entry, debit preference share capital 500,000, retained earnings also debit 30,000, and preference share redemption fund credit 530,000.
Contingency fund is a cash set aside for the purpose of meeting obligations that may arise from contingencies like pending lawsuits or taxes in dispute. So, bago tayo pumunta sa contingency fund, alamin muna natin kung ano yung meaning ng contingency. So, ang contingency ay ang mga potential negative events or mga sakuna na pwedeng mangyari sa future, katulad ng fraudulent activity o pandaraya and economic recession or pagdiit ng pag-ikot ng ekonomiya at iba pang economic crisis. So, sa isang kumpanya, hindi maiiwasan na magkaroon ng mga negative events na pwedeng mangyari in the future. So, dito na papasok yung contingency fund. So, ano nga ba ang contingency fund? Ang contingency fund ay ang pera na isinasantabi o inilalaan ng isang kumpanya para sa mga hindi inaasahang sakuna o pagkalugi na pwedeng mangyari. So, ang role ng contingency fund ay para mapanatili ang financial stability ng isang kumpanya in case na magkaroon ng mga sakuna. Katulad nga ng sa example na nasa presentation namin na pending lawsuits or taxes in dispute na karaniwang kinakaharap ng mga kumpanya. Insurance fund, cash set aside for the purpose of meeting the obligations that may arise from a certain risk such as fire, typhoon, explosion, and other casualties. So, ang insurance fund ay ang pera na isinasantabi o inilalaan para matugunan ang mga obligasyon o gastos na maaaring magmula sa ilang mga sakuna, katulad ng sunog, bagyo, pagsabog, lindol at iba pang hindi inaasahan na pangyayari. Katulad nga sa pinag-aralan natin sa law, na basta AOG or Act of God ang nangyayari ay sagot ng insurance company. Ang role ng insurance fund ay para masustain or matugunan ang mga gastos na nagmula or nag-arise sa mga negative natural events. So kung naguguluhan kayo between contingency fund and insurance fund, ang contingency fund ay ang mga pera na nilalaan para sa mga unexpected negative events na gawa ng tao or human being ang dahilan, katulad nga ng fraudulent activity. Samantalang ang insurance fund ay ang mga pera na inilalaan para sa mga unexpected negative natural events katulad ng paglindol, pagsabog, typhoon at sunog.
Before we end our discussion, recap po muna tayo sa mga na-discuss namin for today. Under the Module 15, Accounting for Investment, Investment Property, and Others, natutunan ninyo na may tatlong involved in investing a property. Yung una is the lessor, kung saan siya yung nag-lease out or in short, the owner of the property na ino-occupy naman ng tenant or lessee. Lastly, yung nagbabind sa dalawang entity na yan ay yung tinatawag na lease in a form of contract. You also learned na ang investment property ay nililease out under finance lease to earn capital appreciation. Note po that there is a differentiation between investment property and owner-occupied since the latter ay mako-considered as PPE na kaiba po sa purpose ng investment property which is to generate cash flow independently. Before we end our discussion, recap po muna tayo. Under the Module 15, Accounting for Investment, Investment Property, and Others, natutunan ninyo na may tatlong involved in leasing out the property. Yung una is the lessor, kung saan siya yung owner of the property na ino-occupy ng lessee. Lastly, yung nagbabind sa dalawang entity na yan ay yung tinatawag na lease in a form of contract. You also learned na ang investment property ay nililease out under finance lease to earn capital appreciation. Remember na ang kaibahan ng investment property ay kaya nitong mag-generate ng income independently sa ibang asset, habang yung PPE ay ginagamit ng company for operation or production. In recognition naman po ng investment property, may tinatawag na subsequent measurement na pwede kayong pumili either fair value model or cost model. Pero preferably na fair value model ang gamitin since it reports yung true value ng property. After po ng investment property, na-discuss ang funds, which is money na set aside po for specific purposes. There are funds for current purposes na na-discuss a while ago. These are petty cash funds, payroll funds, interest fund, dividend fund, and tax fund. And meron din pong funds for non-current purposes, sinking fund, preference share redemption fund, plant expansion fund, and insurance fund. Tapos na po ang report namin. Naway may natutunan kayo. Take care and God bless.